Are you as psyched as I am, by the way? I am out of my mind psyched, yes? So I'm Ben Freed. I'm the CIO and the site lead here in New York. And I get the incredible privilege of welcoming you to a Talks at Google event. And this one is incredible because we have the cast and the book writer of Dear Evan Hansen here. And we're going to start with two songs from Taylor Tresnch and Dreyfuss.
I don't need you to sell me on reasons to want you. I don't need you to search for the proof that I should. You don't have to convince me. You don't have to be scared you're not enough. 'Cause what we've got going is good. I don't need more reminders of all that's been broken. I don't need you to fix what I'd rather forget. Clear the slate and start over. Try to quiet the noises in your head. We can't compete with all that. So what if it's us? What if it's us and only us? And what came before won't count anymore or matter. Can we try that? What if it's you? And what if it's me? And what if that's all that we need it to be? And the rest of the world falls away. What do you say?
I never thought there'd be someone like you who would want me.
Well,
So I give you 10,000 reasons to not let me go. But if you really see me, if you like me for me and nothing else, well, that's all that I've wanted for longer than you could possibly know. So it can be us and only us. And what came before won't count anymore or matter. We could try that. It's not so impossible. Nobody else but the two of us here. 'Cause you're saying it's possible. We can just watch the whole world disappear till you're the only one I still know how to see. It's just you and me.
it'll be us and only us. And what came before won't count anymore.
We can try
that,
you and me. That's all that we need it to be. And the rest of the world falls away. And the rest of the world falls away. The world falls away. The world falls away. And it's only us.
Dear Evan Hansen opened in 2016. It had rave reviews. It won 6 Tony Awards in 2017, including Best Musical, and it took home the 2018 Grammy Award for Best Musical Theater Album. A letter that was never meant to be seen, a lie that was never meant to be told, a life he never dreamed he could have. Evan Hansen is about to get the one thing he's always wanted, a chance to finally fit in. So let's welcome the cast and book writer, Stephen. And could you, I apologize, but could I ask you each to introduce yourselves?
Yeah. Steven, you want?
Oh, no, sorry.
We're very organized.
Yeah, I'm Taylor Tresnch. I play Evan.
I'm Laura Dreyfuss. I play Zoe.
I'm Kristolyn Lloyd, and I play Alana Beck.
I'm Will Roland, and I play Jared Kleinman.
I am Michael Park. I play Larry Murphy.
And I'm Stephen Levenson, and I wrote the book.
And can I introduce the musicians who were just on stage?
Yeah,
That was Ben
Great
Cohn, our music director, on the keys. On the guitar, we had Dylan Condor. On the bass, Rob Jost. And on the cajon, Mr. Jamie Eblin.
Thank you. So, Stephen, why don't we start with you? You wrote the book. You won the Tony Award. Yes? Woo! So you seem like a good person to start with. When, not just when, but how did you get the idea for this? And when did the writing start?
Yeah, well, this all began actually with the one of our composers, Benj Pasek, who had an experience in his high school where a classmate of his died of a drug overdose. And this was a kid who didn't have a lot of friends, who was sort of an outsider. Nobody really knew him at all. And in the aftermath of his death, what was curious was that everyone in the school all of a sudden, had a connection to him that they claimed. They were, we were best friends when we were 6, or our lockers were next to each other. Everyone sort of wanted ownership of this tragedy, or just to insert themselves into it. And this was way before, this was like 1998 probably. So this was before social media. But Benj always remembered that experience as being sort of formative, and particularly troubling to him was the fact that he too wanted to have some kind of relationship to the kid who died too. Like he felt that urge at the same time as he found it ridiculous that other people did. And so Benj and Justin Paul, the other composer, they went to college together and they began writing musicals, and they talked about this weird experience together. And they, in the years that followed, things like 9/11 happened, and obviously the rise of social media, and this idea of kind of, we always like grope at the word for it, but it's like grief exhibitionism maybe, or this idea of having to put yourself into a tragedy, or whenever a celebrity dies, people are all of a sudden like, oh, that was my favorite actor. We shared an elevator together once. And so that was sort of the kernel of the idea, which was kind of a very heady idea. And then when they came to me, basically we had this incredible producer, Stacy Mindich, who loved their music and basically told them, what's the idea that you guys have that nobody else wants to do? And they had this crazy idea. And they brought me on board. And as we started to talk it over and to try to tease out what we thought was so interesting thematically about this, we quickly realized that we didn't want to write a satire. That was the first sort of impulse, was like, the obvious story here is to poke fun at our false connections and our attempts to fit in. And we were sort of like, well, what's the deeper human impulse behind it? What is actually propelling people to want to do this? And it felt like it has something to do with a desperation to connect. And so the character of Evan sort of came out of the idea of like, what would happen if there was a kid who was unable to connect? And that's sort of how the story all came together. And that was in 2012 we first started talking. And the first production, or no, I'm sorry, that was 2011. Yeah, so it took us like 5 years before the show was on stage, I think. So it was a long process.
And just as a follow-up question on the process, how did the collaboration with them work? I mean, did music and song lead the thinking about the plot? Did plot bring music together? Were these things kind of all intertwined?
What ended up happening is we hashed out together over several months like a basic rudimentary set of characters and an idea, and then I went off and wrote the first act as if it were just a play. And I left spaces where we had discussed there possibly being songs where I felt like, oh, maybe this is a song. And I either would write these monologues there that felt sort of lyrical, or I would leave them blank. And then when I gave that to them, they said, oh, this is a good place for a song, this isn't. And then it sort of began this process where very soon it became kind of unclear where the division, began and ended. We were really back and forth.
to kind of continue the theme of that question about the evolution of the show. So, four of you have been with it since the very beginning, right? And so, how has it evolved as you got attached to it? I mean, to what degree have you shaped the characters or the plot, or have you seen it change over time?
You're asking if no one else is here that has been with the show since the beginning. How it
Bragging.
evolved? No, I remember. We were
stand alone.
We were talking at one point. There was a song called "Going Viral." There were a lot of songs that had come and gone throughout that process. Obviously the cast had changed. At one point there was a student body. There was an ensemble, and that we I don't know what the decision was to kind of diminish that. I think it was the growth of the projections and using them as that social media engine and the student body. But I also remember at one time we were talking about this too, the school shooter chic line. And I don't want to, I don't want to start something that you're probably going to finish later. But at one point he was wearing it was based basically on the whole Columbine thing at one point, right? That he was wearing a long black jacket.
Yeah,
right?
I'm trying to remember. I think that was like a wardrobe decision that we nixed. I think that was... I'm trying to remember where that came from. But yeah,
The
for
show
sure.
is peppered with stuff like that.
Yeah. Yes.
Like Mike
Yeah.
grew his hair out, and so there's a line about his hair in there. And there's like, there's all sorts of. I always like to say, like, for every sort of like joke that I have in the play. For those of you that haven't seen it, it sounds like a real bummer of a play.
Yeah.
But there's lots of humor in it. I'm involved in a lot of the humor. And like I like to say, like, for every sort of like funny thing that I say, for like every line, there's like two other funny things that Steven wrote that I just like couldn't do. Like they just weren't funny when I did them. And so they're not in the play. That's it. And that's true for all of our material. The stuff that we could sort of make work. There's a lot of times where you would sort of write like what you were feeling, and then like you would say it very like articulately, and then it all sort of became like a and that's how he felt.
Well, there's also the show changed from DC. We had two songs change, the opening number and then the Act 1 finale, which used to be a song called A Part of Me. And that song was a little bit more about people wanting to connect to the tragedy. And I know that Benj and Justin have spoken about this, and I'm sure you can too as well. But like they wanted to make it more about a realization that Evan has, and then therefore a celebration, which is now You Will Be Found. And so it became more of an anthem at the end.
A lot of our impulse in writing the show, it deals with a lot of complicated moral issues. And a lot of our early impulses were to shy away from those things or to be a little bit afraid of them. And I think that is an example of like, let's give Evan the moment where he's really enjoying what he's found. Like let's live in that complicated moment instead of trying to gloss over it and pretend that it's not complicated.
I mean, it's amazing to me to think that you might have thought of the finale for the first act differently, because it seems to me so central to the play, right? It's a rebirth scene, among other things, right? And it just was so gripping because of that. But that brings up another question in my mind. Do each of you have a most favorite thing that's no longer in the play? What's the thing you miss the most that was there and isn't there anymore? Sorry, is this a terrible wording?
No. I mean, I'll start. I had a line that I used to love that we had to cut at second stage, and it was basically commenting on how my mother is now acting different once Connor has passed away. And I said, she likes you being here. You remind her what it's like, but it's different. It's better than how it used to be. And then Evan says this beautiful line about how I think that's what happens when people leave. You just remember them how they used to be. And I just loved that line so much, and that was one of my favorite things, my favorite scenes.
That was my favorite scene too. It really was. I mean, it was. It's you have to. That was the hardest. I literally from the beginning was like, I'll cut anything in the show except for that scene. It was just this little scene, but it was really beautiful. But it just didn't. You realize when you work on a musical, there's so many strange technical. It had to go for a very technical reason that was just basically like we needed to get to the end of the first act sooner. And it's like it's crushing, but it's also like, it's like by the end of like 5 years of working on something, you've killed every one of your darlings, like for sure. Because also as the book writer, your job is sort of like, if it's better in a song, like it should be a song. So a lot of it is like your favorite stuff goes away or becomes a song.
I miss in the bedroom. Sorry, Kristolyn. In the bedroom down the hall was a song that the two moms sang to each other. They were sitting in their respective sons' bedrooms and missing them both, and they had this beautiful duet together, and it was a tearjerker for me. It was beautiful. That's what I miss.
Kristolyn, you were poised to speak.
I realized what I was about to say isn't so much about missing something that's changed. So maybe you'll get to the question of what do you like that's changed.
What do you like that, Kristolyn? Kristolyn, what do you like that's changed?
Well, I, for one, have not been with it for 5 years. I was brought on after Arena, so I like that they changed that.
Yes, as do I. So it means you're here.
And I was very happy to join. And they also brought some stuff in, for the character and for the show that wasn't there at second stage. They brought it to Broadway, which was really exciting. They, for Alana, she was not as essential to the revealing of everything that happens in the end as she is now. And so I really liked that they kind of gave her character not so much of this kind of like ensemble feel that our characters kind of took over when they got rid of the student body, but they made her, an essential part of the storytelling, which was exciting for me.
Yeah. No, but at the same time, your character has this amazing arc, right? Where, super achiever who seems to have kind of everything behind her, but reveals a depth that's not obvious. And
I love that you said super achiever. I think in the beginning I was very scared of being this villain, and I've had a lot of experiences with being a villain in a show, and the writers being like, we don't really care about the arc at the end of it. And I'm like, but every character's arc matters, and that's one of the things that I loved about working with Steven and Benj and Justin and Mike Greif. They were really like, they gave her like an arc. They gave her a final thing in the end that kind of exposed why she does what she does. They did it with Jared as well. And not a lot of writers will take the time to put some kind of ending or cap or understanding on people that are essential to this plot, because then you walk away thinking that they are the villains, which is not the case in this show. No one is.
No, I mean, I completely agree with you. I thought one of the most amazing things, I'm lucky enough to have seen the show twice, one of the most amazing things is that there are no villains. Everyone is relatable. Everyone is real. Everyone is someone whose shoes you could walk in, right? And that's so much better than, villains are cartoon characters, right? Because no one is purely basically unalloyed evil, right? So there might be some exceptions, but you know what I mean. So anyway, so thank you for bringing that up. While you have the mic, I just thought, I was curious about, since you did kind of, were there other, you came a little later to the show, as you pointed out, as your character was developed. What was that like joining? Was the crew already pretty tight? Was it, I'm not asking you to rat out like your colleagues or anything like that.
It's a really good group of people. And, you enter a project with trepidation because you don't know where you fit in, you don't know what role you play amongst the group. I mean, it all kind of works out in the end, and who's supposed to be there is going to be there, and what's supposed to happen is going to happen. And the process was a lot because I had to do so much in a short amount of time. I don't know if I'm speaking for you correctly, but Stacey says at one point that Alana is one of the most rewritten characters in the show. Yeah. And so when I showed up, it was really great to collaborate with the creative team and, to be in rehearsals and to be like, okay, give me notes. And then in some rehearsals to be like, I need you to leave me alone so I can figure out something for you. And so I found that it was a lot of work, but I, at one point, was able to completely trust that they were going to let, the story serve the character and the character serve the story.
Cool. On this subject of joining the cast somewhat later, Taylor, you are the newest member of the cast. And by the way, congratulations on a great run in Hello, Dolly with Bette Midler.
Thanks.
Absolutely awesome. So what has this transition been like for you, and the onboarding, as we would call it here, been like?
Terrible.
We call it a put-in on Broadway.
Now I know.
It's been like truly magical. This is to be the as Kristolyn experienced, to be the one person who's sort of like thrown into this like pre-existing machine is very scary. But everyone could not have been more like open-hearted and supportive and kind. And I just loved the show so much the first time I saw it. So I feel very lucky to be saying these words.
So while you have the mic, and you did take over from Ben and from Noah, right? And they each kind of brought their own style. What what did you bring to make Evan your own, and how did you think about that? I had. Could I share one little observation? Please. I don't know. Again, I might be a terrible audience member, but I one small thing you did that really touched me was I think when Connor pushes you over in the beginning, there was this bit where you go and grab the back of your shirt and pull it down. And maybe that was just a natural thing that you do because you've been pushed down on the ground, but I thought that, and you don't want people to see, no Krakatoa or anything like that, but I thought that it was somehow a bit of a tell into the character, that kind of his awkwardness and his trying to hide and so on, and just kind of wanting to straighten himself up. It seemed so real, and I don't know if that was a conscious thing that you did or something like that, but I thought that was an element of you bringing something to the character that I hadn't seen before.
I would love to take credit for that, but that's a very specific note from our director and our movement director. They that was so I kept not doing it, and they were like, "Pull your shirt down." So the praise goes to them. It is such a beautiful detail of him just trying to cover up and hide. So no, I don't bring anything interesting.
So sorry, I killed my question, which was what
I would say I bring gorgeous looks. No, I think I'm not. We're all different people and different actors, so we just sort of without even having to think about it or make a conscious decision, we all sort of make it a different Evan.
I had a kind of a transitional question on that same subject for which I mentioned, I think, to you and Laura a little earlier, which was that the first time I saw the show, am I allowed to give spoilers? No? Yes? A little? No? Not really? Okay. I'll skirt the spoiler. So let's just say at the end of the final scene, the first time I saw it...
Everyone dies.
You don't know me. You don't need me here. So I left thinking it was a very bittersweet moment. These people there is closure, but these people are done with each other. And when I saw it Wednesday, I thought, well, I didn't think, sunshine and unicorns. I did think maybe they'll talk to each other again, and maybe the relationship isn't completely dead. And I was wondering, that could just be because I'm a terrible audience member and I got something wrong. But is that an element of something that is and maybe for Laura, is this a difference between working with Taylor and working with others? Is it just something else?
I think like I said, it's depends on show to show, but I think there's this really sad, heartbreaking quality to the scene no matter what. Yeah. Just because for her own self-worth, there can be no continuation of the relationship, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a want for that. And I think that it just, reflects on the complicated nature of their relationship and how things worked out. But I think that the most important thing is that we know that they are both okay in a way, and that there's hope. And I would like to think that that's what people take away at the end. Yeah.
Heavy stuff.
And they die. So.
Yeah. on the subject of heavy stuff, Will. There's this line very early in the play. You describe Connor as very school shooter chic, and obviously, given recent events, there's an immediacy. I thought I heard a kind of gasp in the audience on Wednesday night when you said that. And did you think about changing the line? Did you think about delivering the line differently? How
funny that you should bring that up.
What has your process been, given what's happened?
Well, it's definitely been a sort of collaboration. It's been a conversation, I should say, between Steven, myself, Stacy, our producer,
and
Michael,
that line has
our director.
Always been in there.
That line's been in there
for at least 4 years.
Yeah,
probably.
And it's always been, I think throughout the course of the play, Jared, the character that I play, says sort of just a lot of sort of coarse, very honest dialogue. I think, it reminds me of things that I might have said when I was 17 and didn't really realize sort of the power of the speech. And so, that line at the beginning has always sort of certain folks have sort of come to me I don't know if you can say that, because it's very, it sort of gets under people's skin a little bit. And because we look at it with so much more context and from the sort of world that we live in. But I think, what we talked about is, does it feel like, what has changed, and how does our play sort of live in it? The play lives in a different world than it did, 8 weeks ago. And the play has not changed, but the world has changed. And so we have to sort of figure out does it what does this say now? And I think in the end we decided it's important to have this dialogue be true and be real and to sort of let this thing move through time in that way and let people have those reactions when things are raw and fresh so that we can sort of like examine the way that we speak and also create this situation for Connor. Within the brief glimpses we get of Connor's life, people are kind of awful to him in different ways. Either through neglect or sort of, that's sort of like, I say sort of like mean, somewhat abusive things towards him. And then he sort of isn't understood by people. And so I think, it's a really valuable moment for us to sort of get inside what people think of this boy. And then when we as the audience try to imagine what he was like after he has killed himself. Sorry, that's a spoiler, but it's like the first 5 minutes of the play. Like after he's killed himself, everyone starts to imagine him their own way. And I think in a brilliant way, we all sort of are already doing that before he has taken his life. We're projecting onto him who he is and what we think he is and how he should act and what he should do.
Yeah. It's a really tricky. We had a lot of back and forth last week about this because and it's interesting because from the very, very first reading, people told me to change the line. Like it's never not been disturbing, and the character is glib, but I don't want the show to be glib, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And the honesty of that character, that is, I think that is what the character would say. And what I thought was, I went really back and forth on this because part of me just doesn't want to. I don't want to pull the audience too much out of what they're watching, so that they start to think, "Oh, that's interesting that they said that. Am I upset about that? I wonder if they wrote that before this happened." You know what I mean? Like I don't want that to start. But I also feel like part of what we're showing is a generation that is desensitized in a lot of ways to these things. And also that uses humor to try to cope with the trauma of knowing how ubiquitous this is. And like you said, in high school, people say crazy, terrible things that really are meant to cover up their fear of these things. You know what I mean? So I felt like it was important, partly as this sounds really overblown, but like as a document of our time, which is what all art is in some respect, like that it was important to keep this and show that this is the time that we're living in.
So on this subject of how we communicate and so on, Michael, for you, a question. I thought that your character has this amazing moment in the How to Break in a Glove song where in just kind of one song you get such a view into his character and the relationship he didn't have with his son and his need for it and all the stuff that's missing in someone who's otherwise kind of cut from the image of the stoic father man type, right? And I'm trying to turn this into a question. I guess, I understand you're a father as well, and I'm wondering if how you think about parenting has been influenced by the role, or what you bring to the role has been influenced by your experience as a parent.
Well, I think, I talk to a lot of kids, obviously, in the stage door, and they always say the number one thing they say is, "You make me want to have this show, and your role makes me want to have a better relationship with my father," and I think that's really important. And I don't know if that's what you set out to do, but it's reaching a lot of kids. But I'll tell you, for me personally, and I say this a lot, I have 3 kids: 20-year-old, 18, 13, who's right in the middle of it, and she's giving it to us. I can honestly
I have a
tell you,
13-year-old too, so yeah.
Woo, it's tough. So then, but I've got to tell you, it really has opened the door to communication that I never thought was possible. I mean, my dad wasn't, the most overt person in the world either, but it was interesting, kind of tiptoeing around him and his moods. And now my kids know immediately that they can come to me, and it's never been so good, really, through this mire that Larry Murphy has to kind of go through to reach someone who is actually looking for the same exact thing that he's looking for, in a way. And that's what To Break in a Glove is really about, the fact that they're kind of meeting on the same ground and not really reaching each other, but reaching each other. And it's and I feel that every adolescent is looking for that too. And what I tell the kids at the stage door a lot of times is like, I have no idea how to talk to my dad. I said, well, have you tried to talk to him at his level? I mean, seriously. Hey, Dad, what are you watching? Fox News. Okay. Well, what's Hannity up to? I mean, just ask him questions about him. As much as you would like to think he would, you want him to be in your life and ask you questions about you, for sure, you should be asking him maybe some, like, what do you do today? Ooh, those are great shoes, or something. Anything to reach, anything to get into his world for a little bit, into his orbit. So that's basically what it's all about. Communication is fantastic with my children now.
Wow.
Thanks, Stephen.
Wow. Hey, so on the subject of communication, thank you for the segue. Social media is this factor. It's almost another character in the play, and happy to see that YouTube plays a part in that as well. Go YouTube.
That was a really good buy. That was a good buy you guys made there.
I know who writes my paycheck. So, but also the way that the production has used social media and YouTube to bring fans together. And Michael, you talked about connecting with fans at the stage door, but it seems to me like the things that you've done through YouTube and social media to connect with fans kind of open up a new chapter in what's possible in theater. And in terms of promoting things, I think we're going to play a brief video from one of these fan-sourced collages that the production has put together. Yes? Are we going to do that? Yeah.
When the darkness crashing through,
When you need someone to carry you, when you're broken on the ground, you will be
It's the virtual choir, everybody.
The whole video is about 5.5 minutes long, and I recommend it if you haven't
YouTube.
seen it. You said it. I think we're going to have a couple more of my questions before we move to audience questions. So maybe one or two more questions of mine, and then for the audience, please queue up behind the mics that are here in the aisles. And if you start queuing up now while I give you cover time with a question or two, will be good. So just so for all of you, do you have a favorite moment in the play for each one of you? Is there one favorite moment, scene, something? Taylor? Taylor?
Gosh, it changes every night, certainly. I really love Anybody Have a Map, the song the moms sing up the top.
Yeah.
It's like hard for me to not just like rock out. That's my answer, final answer.
I always go between If I Could Tell Her or probably the orchard scene. I just really love those moments.
I like Waving Through a Window because we all kind of love to be backstage riffing and like doing our own runs and harmonies to it. And sometimes Evan has been like, we can hear you backstage. Yeah, we can hear you backstage. That's fun.
My favorite is Evan has this line in the second act. He says something. Connor was really lucky to have a dad who, what did he say, cared
So much about taking care of stuff.
who cared so much about taking care of stuff. And it's I think it's a really revealing moment where these sort of two boys are so similar and yet so different. And I don't know. I love that line a lot. It's very heavy. Good work, Stephen.
I like playing air cello with Adele during Sincerely Me. I play a mean air cello. Sincerely Me is really one of my favorite songs.
I have two moments. One is I like all of it, and I like everyone in the show so much.
Thank you, Stephen.
But no, I like, there's a scene in the second act with Connor and Evan that I love the design of it, and I love, it's sort of the lowest moment for Evan, or up to that point, the lowest moment for Evan. Yeah. And I just love, I love what the actors that we have bring to that scene. And I always love Words Fail in the second act.
It's
In
my favorite.
In DC, I used to always, I would like leave the show for a while in the second act because I was like, I know what happens. But then I would always come back at that moment because I just loved, because every actor that does it, because we've seen a couple now, it brings something new and something it's just such a raw, painful moment. And Michael Greif's staging of it is so simple and spare and perfect.
I agree with all of you, by the way. Not that matters. So I think audience members queued up. Why don't we start here, and then we'll bounce back and forth across mics with questions.
So I have a question for the entire cast. I know that throughout the play, it sort of crosses a very large emotional spectrum. It's sort of, there's highs, there's lows. Do you have like a process or something that you go through before every show to sort of dig deep and be able to hit all of those every night?
I don't know.
I'll hop in on that. What's actually funny is I think that we almost do the opposite. We try to sort of get together and like make each other laugh a little bit and sort of look each other in the eyes because we're there are some moments where we're sort of terrible to each other on stage, where we're mean and we're coarse and we're uncaring, and those are the things that Stephen has written so beautifully, that we can sort of like have those moments on stage and those sort of take us there, because as long as you can sort of like live in that reality, it gets there. So I think actually most of our prep time is spent like taking care of one another and sort of coming up from that place.
It's always when I'm most desensitized to what I'm about to go through that I go through it the hardest. It's uncanny that way. Do you feel the same way?
No, you kind of have to trick. Sorry, you have to like trick your body. Like I don't like to get into my costume until places, and that's not fun for my stage manager sometimes. But I like to trick my body. I don't want it to know it's about to go through this like emotional journey, and so we stand backstage and we crack jokes because we have to be good to each other off stage as much as possible. One, because we're a tiny cast and there's not a lot of people to rotate through when you're sick of each other. So it's like a family. It's like living in a compound with your family, and you show up every day at the same time and you have to be really cool to each other. So,
and I think also emotionally, that's why we're able to do so much with each other, is because of this deep love that we all have for one another, and that kind of inspires all of the emotional requirements needed for this show.
I'll say the writing too does like the heavy lifting. You don't have to, there's like nothing really to work up for if you just like listen to what's going on stage.
I'd like to, I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to be asking questions anymore, but I'd like to ask the mirror image question, which is, how do you come down off of that? I mean, there are gallons of tears in that theater at the end of that show, and it looks, I mean, I see what looked like tears in the cast. I mean, it looks such heavy stuff. How do you come down from that? I mean, or is it just, I didn't understand, someone didn't tell me what acting is, or is it...
We literally crack jokes after.
Yeah,
like, we
really.
get off stage and
Michael and I like to share a beer at the end of the play, and then I take the train home. And the train is, I have about a 45-minute ride to Park Slope, and it's very calming and relaxing. I listen to a podcast sometimes. No, I mean, it is. It's very intense. It's very heavy, and it's sort of like it's about decompressing. And I personally, I don't like to go out the stage door and meet fans because I feel like I'm too like sensitive and like raw, and like someone's gonna say something to me and I'm gonna take it the wrong way. So like all I want to do is like put my big headphones on and get on the train and like go home. Kristolyn.
I'm like the opposite. I don't take the train, and I learned very early on that I play 17, and when I get off that stage, I don't want to be seen as a 17-year-old, but I look very young. And I found that when I would get on the train, I got in there were a couple times I got in like fights with people on the train. I'm also a very mouthy, tough girl. And so I find that I need to take a car home, and I need to not be around people after I'm done with the show, because we did do a lot of heavy lifting, and it's not always fun to watch somebody go through that journey of losing everything that they had worked so hard to get, or not worked hard to get. It just fell into their lap.
Wow.
I mean, your character, but But, like after we finish, it's a muscle. You turn it off. Laura and I will run around upstairs, we'll listen to rap songs and Beyonce and dance around in our underwear with Jennifer Laura Thompson. We just have to. It's necessary. So, and don't take the train home. You're welcome.
I think we have another audience question.
Thanks for coming to chat with us. I love the show. My question is about process, and you mentioned that you have a decision to make around whether you keep a line in the show that could be sensitive, whether you take it out. After opening night on Broadway, when previews are done, how much can you change and in what context?
That's actually a good question. I think we can change stuff. It's hard to rehearse.
You're allowed to change anything.
Will knows everything.
And because of the unions, it's very expensive to rehearse. And I don't think you're allowed to change things without having rehearsal. So there's a financial incentive not to. But you could. There's like
I changed something like 2 weeks ago. I changed the line.
when the rhythm is screwed up a little bit, it's when the rhythm is screwed up after you've been doing something for 4 years and you come in, just take a word out, just a word
That's
out.
literally what it is.
It ruined the entire, for about a week and a half, it ruined the entire line for me.
When I go, I have like a running list of things I would like to change. It's terrible. It's like, that's why it's sometimes hard to go back, because it's like, I wish I had, you know what I mean? Like I catch these things. Yeah.
Look for those changes on the tour.
Yeah, exactly.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
The preface to my question is going to sound like a criticism, but I promise it's not.
I'm so excited.
So my question is about the balance between what your vision is and what you have to work with the actors. When I saw it, I was sitting in the center of the last row in the balcony, and there was one scene, I don't know what it was, and everyone is lined up on the back in a row, and then like 6'5" tall Connor in the corner is not lit up and looks like Slender Man. And for me, it was very distracting, but obviously there's nothing you can do about it. You can't shrink him to the height of the rest of the actors. So I was wondering, like, what, like that, there's nothing you can do about it, but like, what is the balance between, there's an actor that's more comfortable doing this versus what we had originally wanted to block it this way, but we can't because these two people, stuff like that.
It's a great question. It's one of the great challenges and also the joys, I think, of dramatic writing is that you have these people that you have to like you can't just write a character and write a novel and that's what it is. It's like what you write is really just the first part of the process. I love writing with actors and around actors. And I feel like a lot of this show is written around these people on stage. And then hopefully, for me, and I don't know if this answers your question exactly, but I guess I think the more specific you can be for those actors, and Benj and Justin are very similar. There are vocal parts in the show that are because the actors that originated these roles could sing those parts. And I hope that the specificity of those characters, because they're molded onto that person, are therefore that much sharper and easier to play for future actors because it's so specific. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we do a lot, so much of the show is written and thought about around those actors. But clearly also not, it's weird when I realize that where you sit in the theater matters and what night of the week you come matters. And that's the kind of thing that as a writer, that can keep me up at night. You know what I mean? That's why there is something very comforting about film and TV where you're in the editing room and it's we are fixing this moment and it's there. You know what I mean? So that's interesting.
I think we have time for 2 more audience questions, just as an FYI.
Made it. Great. Okay. Huge fans in. Saw the show 4 times. Changed a flight to be here.
Welcome.
And I'm probably going to miss it because it's raining a lot, but that's fine. Worth it. So one thing that I think is so wonderful about this show that you guys kind of touched on before is how all of the characters in the ensemble have a full narrative arc and some really deep humanity. One of my favorite scenes is when Larry Murphy is looking around at all the social media and finally collapses under the weight of his son's death. What do you think are some of those other more nuanced moments that help inform your character to any of the actors or that you were thinking of when you wrote the book?
Well, I do know we were very careful and a lot of the rewrites that happened over the years were about sharpening everybody's arc and making it clear. Like for instance, with Larry, we realized I think it was in DC, we realized we loved that moment that you're talking about, where he breaks down. And then you start to think, well, are we earning that? Is it exactly as powerful as it could be? And then we actually started to work backwards from that moment. And we were like, you know what, we're setting up the idea that Larry is having a lot of trouble expressing his grief, but in certain moments he actually seems to be grieving openly. And so we were like, we have to sharpen it and make it really clear that that's his dilemma, and then the payoff is that moment. Do you know what I mean? So it's a lot about, like, as writers, it's a lot about sort of following your instincts, and then as far as they'll take you, and then kind of putting on your analytic brain and being like, what's the math of this moment? Like also like Alana, it's like, you know, we want her to get to a moment where she exposes the fact that she's really lonely and feels a kind of invisibility. And then it was like, well, let's work backwards. Where do you start with that arc? So it's a lot of that, actually.
We also had a really great, and to the credit of our creative team, wonderful communication and collaboration with them. And so we, as actors, felt like we had the ability to speak up and say, I'm not getting from A to C. And like, just for example, when I go from needing, after basically I kiss Evan at this point in the show, and it went from a place of really not liking him. And so there were like little things in You Will Be Found specifically where like the audience might not even be noticing it, but it's stuff where I'm clocking a lot of the journey of his, you know, his beautiful speech, and then realizing like what he's actually given me and my family, which then leads me to want to kiss him. And to be able to communicate with Michael Greif, our director, and Stephen and Benj and Justin about like what we can do to help make that easier. And yeah.
Thanks, guys.
I think last audience question, sir.
Thank you guys for being here. Stephen, I have a question for you. You talked about how you wrote initially as if this were a play.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought the show was really beautifully structured. Can you talk a little bit about, like, you were kind of talking about it now, but like, how did you initially think about the structure? And then when you're making these changes, like, how do you trust those changes when the show is actually like up and you need to like have a show tonight, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely a process where, I've written plays before, and plays are really a different animal than musicals. Like, I feel like when I write a play and I read it, I kind of know what it is. And when we do it, it's going to be basically that. But with a musical, there's some kind of weird, what you have on the page and what comes out on stage is radically different for some reason. And you kind of never know what you have until it's on its feet. And that was certainly true with this show. And the more readings we did and the more workshops and then productions, the thing that we learned could guide us, that we learned somewhat early on, was like, what we really need, the show works best when we understand exactly why Evan is doing what he's doing. Like, that has to be our guiding principle, is what Evan is making these decisions, why is he making those decisions? And also allowing him to make those decisions. Like in earlier drafts, we struggled a lot with how likable to make Evan, and we were very scared that if he was too proactive in trying to get what he wanted, that we would hate him. And so we kind of pussyfooted around a lot in some of the earlier drafts and had more things happen to him. And so, for instance, like in really early drafts, or not even that early, like Alana started the Connor Project. And then in another draft, Jared released the email at the end. And we basically kind of kept upping the ante for ourselves. We were like, what can we get away with? Because we learned that audiences just needed to understand the why and the emotional why of what Evan is doing. And if they did, they were on the ride and they were following it. And as soon as you stop knowing why Evan's doing what he's doing, you start to lose track of the story and it just becomes kind of a muddle. So that became the structuring principle, is like, how is Evan moving this story forward to get what he wants, and what are the complications that are coming up? So the structure kind of the structure formed in process, weirdly. So like, and it became a lot about getting rid of the things that were in the way of that.
Thank you.
From each of you, I would love to hear if there's one thing you want the audience to maybe there's not one thing, but is there one thing you want the audience to walk away with or hold with them after they've seen the show?
Gosh, don't start with me.
I'll start. For me, it's all about, I hope that people will reconsider sort of the ways in which they allow social media to affect them. I think it's really easy to just glance at our phones, and you guys have heard me say this 1,000 times, so I'm sorry, but I feel like it's like the message of the show. But it's we glance at our phones and we scroll through Instagram, we see like a picture of someone looking beautiful and happy. We're like, oh, look how beautiful and happy this person is. Like, why isn't my life like that? And then we'll put something into the machine that we've like cleaned up and doctored and taken away all the ugly bits, and we know that like our stuff that we put out there is fixed, but somehow we can't like immediately believe that other people did the same thing, even though they did. And for me, that's like the big thing that I hope people will consider after seeing the play.
Yeah, and I actually think for younger people, I've learned that they're not even necessarily aware of, the way that we who didn't grow up with social media are aware of that fiction. I feel like for younger people, it's actually a discovery that other people aren't happy. And do you know what I mean? In a way that when I was a teenager, I certainly believed everybody else was happy, but I didn't have the pictures to prove it. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's part of the message that resonates with people is like, oh wait, really? Those people aren't living the life that they say they're living either. Yeah.
We touched on this earlier. I want everyone to go call their father. I want them to call their father or their mother. Just tell them you love them. That's all they want.
Yeah, I would say I hope people walk away with a greater sense of empathy for others, and kind of to touch on what Will said, but realize that we don't know what we see. We don't know what we see on the surface is what's real, and to trust that we don't know who's hurting, and that you could be hurting, and other people feel that way, and that it's important to talk and communicate.
Kristolyn, you have a mic.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's a tug between empathy and comparison being the thief of joy. When you sit there and see other people's lives, it steals your joy if you let it. And that in turn makes it really hard for us to imagine that they need something as well. And that empathy is a huge part of today, especially since we're inundated with so many images and ideas of what life should be, as opposed to allowing what life is to just be life. It can be messy. It doesn't have to be an Instagram filter. So am I allowed to say that word, Instagram? Okay, I didn't know. But yes, I'm going to leave it with that comparison is the thief of joy, and that it's you, and that if you need to get away from all of those things, you should to take care of yourself.
I also think on a fundamental level, it's about change and forgiveness, and that by the end of the show, Evan does change and become a better person, and all these characters do, even though it's a lie. And it's sort of that complexity, but also the fact that change is possible and forgiveness is possible.
Taylor, you get last words if you want them.
No. I just hope people like it.
Well done. All right, so I think we're gonna show another video, and while we're showing the video, I think the cast will file out, and I've been asked to ask you please not to swarm our guests, but to allow them to peacefully make their way to the green room. But before we show the video and say goodbye, can we thank them for an amazing. Thank you. Okay.
Have you ever felt like nobody was there? Have you ever felt forgotten and only loved no one? Have you ever felt like you could disappear? Like you could fall and no one would hear? Even when the dark comes crashing through.
Everyone is wonderful, and I loved it so much because it was inclusive. This is about all of us, and I think it's an important show, and I'm really proud I got to see it.
So let the sun come streaming in, 'cause you'll reach up and
I want you to know this is a compliment when I say I started crying in the first song, and I did not stop.
I think a show like Dear Evan Hansen can start a great dialogue about being your authentic self, which is a really hard thing to find and to be. It can start conversations about the importance of actual human connection.